Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. With me tonight, as always, my good friend Drew Crawley. Drew, how are
Hey,
you?
I'm doing great, sir. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well. Looking forward to spending some time with Fred Swanson from Dancing Goat. We've got a few things we're going to taste together. We're going to talk about Fred, his background. We're going to talk about Dancing Goat and the great things going on there. I had the privilege of being up there, I guess a month or so ago.
Mhm.
And man, they've got some great stuff going on. And it was an exciting distillery to tour. It was an experience that I won't forget. And we'll get a little bit more into that later. But before we get into all of that, I want to tell you a little bit about Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends who happen to make whiskey content for the bourbon fan. We have Distillers Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. They talk with distillers from across the country, around the world, about how they're making the things that they make. And they have tips and tricks of the trade for the home distiller, although we cannot endorse that. We know it happens. Alan also has a show called If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. They talk about the supernatural side of the spirits world. And Alan does that show with his wife, Kim. And finally, my whiskey den, the guys that introduced me to Fred Swanson. So I have a great appreciation for them for that. But they have a great show. Pat and Mike, they run that show Monday nights, 9 o'clock, where craft whiskey is king. Speaking of Mike, we have a very special announcement for you.
All right. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification to find out when new episodes come out, which is every Wednesdays on all of your streaming services everywhere. Apple, Spotify, whatever other ones there are, and the YouTube where you can watch the live recording itself.
Thanks, Mike. He's always a trooper. Shows up. He's the Cal Ripken of the show. He never misses a show. So
That's awesome.
yeah, he gets a kick out of that. I think he watches every episode of Bourbon Turntable, and after his little clip is done, he turns it off. So Fred Swanson, welcome to Bourbon Turntable, sir. I've been looking forward to this for a while now.
That's awesome. Thank you guys for having me. It's not only an honor, it is a absolute joy to be here with you guys today and talking a little bit about what keeps us impassioned in Little Cambridge, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Well, we're going to pour some Death's Door rye or Death's Door gin right now. And while we're tasting that, Fred, tell us a little about your background and what led you to getting on board with Dancing Goat.
Got it. So I have a very atypical background, but very typical background when it comes to Dancing Goat, in the fact that the majority of us in the Dancing Goat are front of the house folks, typical bartenders. I've had my license for, close to 40 plus years at this point in time, where I've been slinging it behind bars. I'm not behind bars as much as I was back in the day, but I'm still pulling shifts and doing side hustles and doing events, and always thinking about how best our products will integrate across the bar so that people with elbows on can enjoy a beverage. I spent 36 years in high school teaching. I was a high school special ed teacher for many years. Failed theater major prior to that, which allows me the ability to feel pretty comfortable in front of audiences and in front of others. During that time as a special ed teacher / theater coach / sports coach, I always knew that the next thing when I was done with that impassioned project was going to be putting myself out to do the next thing. So I've put on numerous different events. I've not only bartended, but I've put on large events in the beer world, large events in the spirits world, and then just kind of had positioned myself to be able to be going to the next thing. So with that, I've been a coordinator for 3 decades-ish for a little festival called the Great Taste of the Midwest, which is a very large beer festival in Madison, Wisconsin, which right now is in number 2 or number 1 in USA Today's poll that's current for best beer festivals in the country. Second oldest to like the Great American Beer Festival, GABF. And then I got really sick and tired of not being able to afford high-end spirits events. And after a conversation with the individuals that put on Whiskey Fest in Chicago, just got so disappointed in the fact that price should never be a determiner of who's in that room. And with that said, I'm adamant that $350 tickets, $250 tickets, $100 tickets preclude all of us as producers from the right people being in that room. The only people first and foremost that need to be in that room are anybody that works an aisle and works the shelves at a liquor store, anybody that buys in at bars, any bar manager, any bartenders, and bar owners. Those are the only people that should be in first. Then everybody else can be in. And when you're looking at $350 for a ticket at Whiskey Fest in Chicago and a $250 room, $50 to park, it's a midweek event where I got to take a day and a half off of work. I would argue vehemently that the wrong people are in that room. Everybody in that room is already buying that stuff. And you're easily, and I'm not arguing value for dollar, because you already, you can get $350 worth of pours if you do it right. But the bottom line is the wrong people are in that room first and foremost. Everybody in that room is already buying your stuff. And a little distillery in Cambridge, Wisconsin isn't going to get any traction in a room like that because everybody's going to chase and toss into other things. So I started a thing 14 years ago with my friends here in Madison called Distill America, and the tickets are around $60. And the bottom line is, it's some years 250, some years 350 different products in the room, 80-ish different distillers, all American. We don't have to compete against Scotch. We don't have to compete against Irish. We compete against ourselves in what we produce in this country. And it's not a whiskey festival. You can bring as much whiskey as you want. You can bring all the whiskey you want as a producer. But the bottom line is there's absinthe in that room. There's brandy in that room. There's gin. There's vodka in that room.
Yeah.
So it is an American Spirits Festival. It is not a whiskey festival. So with that came this, kind of notion of it's amazing what you can do when nobody has to take a salary and nobody's trying to clear 6+ figures in financial. Because it's one thing when you do it from an outsider's perspective. It's another when you look at it through a producer's lens, like I'm doing now. The days of any of us needing an event because of marketing are very clearly gone 10, 15 years ago in beer, for sure. Nobody needs to show up at a beer festival for marketing anymore. And I would say we're getting close, if we're not already there, in spirits as well. So, you selling it to me that I need to be at your event because of marketing cachet. No, you need to tell me something else. How are you helping the industry? How are we all better because of this event? What does this do for us as producers? So that's my background. And then I just kind of dovetailed that into, as soon as I retired in teaching, it was calling my friends in the industry that I really believed in. And it was 3 distilleries and 1 brewery. And of those 4, the Dancing Goat is the one that ended up coming through. So everybody was local. Everybody were friends. Easily half, if not more, of those 4 were family-owned operations where a guy like me who's not family doesn't have a whole big place in that world. But they were people that I believed in, and I started that conversation that way. I believe in what you're doing, and if there's any way I can help, I'd be happy to. So that's my background, long story short. At the same time, I think that just having a bar background and a sampling background and then event background certainly makes me reasonably valuable for what I'm trying to do here for the Dancing Goat.
Yeah.
I'll say this: a lot of, and Drew and I are as well. A lot of people are fans of Stephen Fonte as a brand ambassador. You're right up there with him as far as I'm concerned, and your ability to effectively promote your brand, but also promote the whiskey community as a whole, and that comes across in talking with you as much as anything, because yes, you're promoting Dancing Goat and the great things you've got going on there, but it's also promoting the whiskey community in Wisconsin and really across the country, and that's that's very commendable, Fred. I think you you handle that very deftly every time I've ever heard you speak or had the opportunity to have a conversation with you. So
Thank you.
that's great.
No, and I don't say it lightly. We don't say it lightly out in Cambridge. We're only better when we're all better. And I'm not saying that when it comes to a silo of producers or a silo of bar owners or restaurant owners or whiskey enthusiasts. We're all only better if we're all better. It's not good for any of us to be far exceeding anybody else, to be better than anybody else, to be so far out ahead of the pack. And it doesn't mean that we are or we aren't. I'm just saying that we merely want, first and foremost, to make Wisconsin proud of what we're doing out in Cambridge. Bottom line is we should be proud of what we're doing in Cambridge. We should be proud of what we're doing in Milwaukee, what we're doing in Baraboo, what we're doing up in Plover. I mean, we're all better when we're all better. And if we can help each other in that endeavor, then we're going to all get better quicker.
Love it.
Yeah.
Man, you're preaching. I dig it, man. The church is good.
That's what it is.
Good.
I mean, the bottom line is, and to me, we're very excited about the awards that we win. But I'm less excited about the awards that we win than I am about having the conversations and building the relationships such that people understand what we're doing, what our background is, what our ethos is, and what we're looking forward to in the future. To me, that's even more important than any award that we may slap on a media label or on a social media post or on a neck or on a bottle. So,
Good.
So talk a little bit about Distill America. I'm glad you brought that up. I think 2021, I was going to go, and I think COVID got it.
Yeah.
And then last year, I think you moved it. I think it was supposed to be in March, and it got moved to May. And so I wasn't able to attend then. So tell us about Distill America, and tell us about when it's going to be in 2023.
So to back up, they both have the same literal timeline almost. The beer festival that I've helped to run, and I did not originate that in any way, shape, or form, but the beer festival that I helped to run is 1 year younger than the GABF, so the second oldest beer festival in North America. Distill America is the second oldest American craft spirits gathering / event, second only to the American Distillers Institute gathering. So both industry insider things. This is put on by enthusiasts, much like the beer festival's put on. I came back and I looked at some of my friends in the beer industry back in the day who were also distilling. Okay. And distillation, if you're a brewer, at its very simplest conceptual level, is just brand extension. Okay. It's just a product extension. You're either already making wine, you're already making cider, or you're already making beer. It's a brand extension. So I asked those guys, particularly the folks at New Holland in Holland, Michigan, I said, if I were going to do this crazy ass thing and I couldn't pay you to come, but I can hopefully pay you at some point in time, would you come? And they're like, oh, hell yes, because we're not invited to anything else. Okay. There's no, and when you set, I'm always worried and / not worried about pointing fingers at other people. But the bottom line is we're a volunteer run organization that has a very accessible booth price point of $200, $100 if you're in the Wisconsin Distillers Guild. We're not a $5,000 booth fee. We're not a $7,500 booth fee to get 3 free tickets and the ability to give your booze away for free. I and my cohorts, we started asking people, we need to get this off the ground because none of us are going to get invited to any of these other things in any quick fashion. So they're all like, yeah, absolutely, dude, we'll do it. So, it was the kids from New Holland. It was, all the different folks. And we never wanted to make the distinction because I don't want to be the arbiter of a juried show in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
I don't want to do it in beer. I don't want to do it in spirits. So it was an invitation, and it was a blanket invitation. I don't care if anybody thinks your stuff is good, bad, or indifferent. It was, if you're enthusiastic about what you're making, I've always said, I'll back up one more step, one more time. The best person to sit next to in a bar is somebody that loves their job. That person, it doesn't matter what they do for a living, but if you can get into a conversation, I love those 20 minutes with somebody that's impassioned by what they do. And you could lay tar, you could be a banker, you could be an accountant, you could be a school teacher. It doesn't matter. If you're excited, that's what I wanted behind the table, because then that would work to sell itself. Okay. And And then somebody asked me once we started it, how will you know that you've made a difference? And I said, I'll have made a difference amongst my whiskey friends when I find 3 of them talking about vodka. Okay. Because nobody wants to talk about vodka. Nobody gives a shit. Everybody says it's odorless and tasteless, and it's all just garbage. It's just hoo-ha talk. I can put three vodkas in front of even the least discerning of palates, and everybody can tell me that they taste different. I will argue vehemently, Stoli tastes like nothing but Russian vodka. And Russian vodka doesn't taste like Polish potato vodka, doesn't taste like an American craft vodka. And that happened in year 3. So when you have the ability to get the right people in the room, people that are excited, because every whiskey geek will come in there and they'll just drink whiskey. But it's not what they talk about typically at the end of the night. What they talk about is, oh my God, I had a gin, or I did my first shot of Malort, okay? And somebody took a Polaroid picture of me, And it was just, all these great stories happen when you start to be a little more expansive.
Absolutely.
So that was what we were trying to do. And, we put it in places. Our goal forever was to be in a place where people could just go upstairs afterwards to a hotel and be safe. We do $5 cab rides anywhere in the county that we subsidize. And we try to give money back every year to the Wisconsin Distillers Guild. So when I can give thousands of dollars annually back to the trade organization that by and large was the heavy lift in that room, totally. So making sure Big Kentucky's in that room, making sure that what I would refer to as kind of that mid-level cap of craft, okay, which could be anything from like Westland whiskey to Wilderness Trail to, Lux Row, all those mid-cap guys, and then all the craft guys below that, okay? Everybody's in the room, not a juried show. Please send somebody that made the product. If you can't send somebody that made the product, send somebody from the distributor that knows about it. And this is not to criticize Eris girls for pouring spirits, but they're not who I'm looking for in that room.
Right.
So, and there are some Eris girls, some Eris guys that are phenomenal behind a table. So send me them if you can't send anybody else. So with that said, that's what, where Distill America kind of came out. And then we had COVID, and Madison is a very, very white collar, white and educated community that is really not ready to gather indoors even today. So last year we put it out. The last event we put out in May outside, and it was a resounding success. People were very excited to have that. And I think we can build on that. What I loved about it was that Madison's built around a bunch of lakes, and the lake that we had Distill America on was on the north side of that lake, and I could see where I put on a beer festival on the south side of that lake. And I love the synergy of just driving, being able to take a boat between the two of them, should that occur, which it won't. But the bottom line is, just kind of the symbiotic relationship of that lake to those two events was pretty cool.
Oh, that's great.
So when is it going to be in 2023?
Right now, it's looking like April, because we're trying to stay away from graduation weekend here in a college town in the University of Madison. And that's not. It's so funny. People are like, "Yeah, you don't want to stay." I'm like, "No, I'd love you guys to be here for graduation weekend." Problem is, then all the out of towners will shirk a little bit because the room is no longer $125; it's $250 for a hotel.
Right.
So we're very cognizant of those types of things. It's not just when a free weekend is, it's when which is also the weekend that we put it in February. For the first 11 years, we had it on because we asked specifically a hotel chain, what's the slowest weekend of the year and when can we get a cheap ass ballroom? Okay. And it was always right around Valentine's Day, because there was no sporting event going on that was a statewide competition that anybody would be in Madison for state wrestling meet, state basketball meet, any of that. So we said, give us that room. And then we just took it. And then a pandemic happened, and now let's be outside.
Good. Good. Well, I'll look forward to seeing more about that soon, I hope. And coming back up to Wisconsin for that. That sounds like a fun event. And
we'd love to have you both.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's talk gin. We've got Death's Door gin in our glass right now. Tell us a little about it, and then we'll talk about it a little more.
To me, it is the quintessential example of dig a little deeper in the conversation. People will tell you unequivocally, and their first, hey, I'm going to make some gin cocktails, or would you like a gin cocktail? Can I buy you a gin cocktail? Can I make you a gin cocktail? And people say, oh God, I hate gin, I hate gin, I hate gin. And what really if you just ask a few more questions, some more leading questions, is you'll find out very often that they don't care for one style of gin.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't care for London dry gin.
Yep.
Almost exclusively. And gin is probably second. This is my anecdotal research. Gin is probably second on the list of things that I don't drink anymore because of a bad night in high school or college. Number one is probably tequila, quite honestly. Gin tends to be number 2-ish, maybe 3. Irish whiskey seems to be up there as well. And it was kind of those things that we could take from our parents' cabinet and then backfill. Okay, and bump back up. So look, well, you didn't take stuff from our parents' cabinet. But when you dig deeper, the thing that became of that gin when that company started in Wisconsin was they kind of exploded people's minds a little bit. It was kind of the time that aviation came out and the time that Death's Door gin came out. Mm-hmm. And it showed people that it didn't have to be London dry. That whole notion of the only definition of gin is that it has to have juniper, mm-hmm. but there's no measurable quantities, there's no measurable levels. So now it's become a spectrum drink. So, and I say this all the time, I think 25%, Fred's personal opinion, 25% of all the gin on the market today is probably closer to flavored vodka than it is to gin. Mm-hmm. But who cares? That's, if you like it, drink it. But if it's a spectrum drink, then we can really hone in and find where terroir works. So things that grow in Sweden, things that grow in Macedonia, things that grow in Peru can make your Peruvian gin, can make your Macedonian gin. And there's your terroir with what grows here. What I loved about Death's Door and the owners when it came up was that's what Wisconsin is known for, that product around the world and around the country. We make no bones about it. We say it at the Goat fairly frequently. People know us in brown spirits for J. Henry's bourbon because it's good, really good, and they're great people. But what the world knows us for is that gin. Okay, when we bought it, their apex was about 50 states, 10 countries. Now we're back in about 40 and 10. We just opened up Spain and Italy, which are big gin markets, and we're moving a lot of gin. And we are very, very proud to be the next caretaker of the product that everybody knows Wisconsin for, and to be able to keep that on the market. It did not feel good. Not only did we not have a gin, but it didn't feel good to watch that potentially go by the wayside and not be made. And then, of course, we make cracks like, aviation's got Ryan Reynolds and we got guys that look like Nick and Fred. Okay. which doesn't help sexy at all. Okay. But, so, I mean, there's just a little bit of humor and for Lord's sake, we are making booze. So let's have a lot of fun when we do it without being denigrating.
Right.
So we didn't want to see that because a lot of the other people that are bidding on that product were not producers. And our fear was that what we're known for could go by the wayside by people that are just trying to squeeze the last bit of profit out of that product, and make a little bit of money and just kind of move it down the road and get on to their next thing. We didn't have a gin, so our next thing was, making it better. Right. So if people ask us, did we change it? I guess we probably technically, legally, probably would say we have to because we know more than we did 15 years ago about distilling. So technically we're better at our craft, but it's made with the same recipe on the same stills, with the same components that they made it 15 years ago. And we're just trying to take it back to year one when everybody's mind was blown about how good gin could be.
Yeah,
most definitely. Well, I love this. And, you mentioned kind of furthering the conversation beyond the London dry style juniper forward thing. I pick up so much like a fennel and coriander type thing on this. It's definitely in that line. I would almost put down a Hefeweizen for like the whole day of Oktoberfest and drink this with a German sausage and kraut type, meal. It just so plays up on those things. And there's not a lot of the key lime. You get some of these that are aggressively citric, and this one has a little bit more subtlety to it on that, almost like orange rather than lime or lemon. So it's very balanced and delicate. I'm really enjoying it.
We say a lot of things to get people's minds to be able to kind of conceptualize what you just said, Drew. But because there's only 3 botanicals in there, obviously it has to have juniper, but then there's coriander and fennel. And Blue Moon did one thing for the world. Okay. And it showed if you made a beer with coriander, don't garnish with anything except an orange, because then you can find the orange citrus that bleeds through in a coriander capacity. So when we do a gin and tonic, a perfect gin and tonic for our gin is to garnish not with a lime. Makes a decent enough gin and tonic with a lime, but it's better with an orange because of the coriander. But then we also use mint, okay, which helps you find fennel on the backside. So it is one of those game changers. If I'm at a bar and I'm pushing that drink across, and people will push it back across the bar back at me sometimes and be like, I ordered a gin and tonic. I don't know what this is. And I'll say the same thing I've said to numerous people. Bottom line is try it. I'll buy it back if you don't like it. And they're like, oh.
Yeah.
I find stuff now. And, so thank you, Blue Moon, for that. But the bottom line is that it's that age-old conundrum of no Italian grandma makes what makes a marinara with 17 different herbs. Okay. Right. She just doesn't. Okay. And a simple recipe can help you not only find things, but not have to have the struggle with your palate that sometimes can be really unnecessary. You can put 48 botanicals in a gin. Right. There's not a palate that's trained, and certainly not an untrained palate that can find 48 botanicals. You just can't. So let's drill down. Let's do what we can. Let's make it super complex on the palate, but at the same time, very comprehensible to be able to understand.
I love it. Yeah.
Thank you. And we're very proud of it. We make no bones about the fact that those guys that created that, John Jeffries, and the crew over there at the beginning, were just killer in that gin. Kudos to them.
It has a great viscosity to it.
It does. And it's where gin should be proofed at to cocktail. And when we get to our brandy, I'll say the same thing, because it is really hard for bartenders and people that sling cocktails and people making cocktails at home to be able to make a good cocktail with something that's 80 proof. It's really hard. You lose your balance and your backbone and the spirit forward nature of a cocktail.
So with the Death Store, what would be the cocktail you would make with it as someone with that bartender background?
It's to me, it's mind-blowingly informative to make that perfect gin and tonic garnished with orange and mint, because I think that really sets the stage for what you can do next. But then I love a Negroni with that. And really, honestly, I think with the right bittering component, you can make a hell of a martini. I mean, there are back days when I started bartending where every martini was a gin martini. Now there's almost exclusively vodka martinis and very few people drinking gin. But then you start to tell people, hold on, let's go to a totally different route and make a gin Bloody Mary. And people are like, gin Bloody Mary? That sounds gross. And I'm like, think about it. Everything in a gin, all those botanicals are savory. What's a Bloody Mary? It's savory. What does tomato build on? Savory. All those herbs work well in the tomato-based cocktail. Try a gin Bloody, and it's mind-blowingly great.
One of the things I like about this is, and any tour that I've ever been on, when somebody talks about their gin, they run away from the juniper side of it. Okay. We've got all these other things in it. And it goes to the other end of the spectrum. I think you guys do a good job of bringing a little bit of balance to that. Now, it's certainly not just the juniper forward that you get from the London dry gin, but it doesn't just completely concede its identity and make it taste more like a weird lemonade.
Absolutely. I will tell you right now, if you're going to ask me the next thing, gin pairs so well with beer-based cocktails. I mean, think about a fruited sour. Think about a fruited sour that might be very citrus in nature, i.e. an orange fruited sour, a grapefruit fruited sour, and think about how to balance that with a cocktail that's a beer-focused, beer volume cocktail, but has an ounce or two of gin and then some bittering component to balance that citric sweetness. I can tell you can make beer cocktails with that gin all day. And it's super fun because it's fun to play because we've all, I mean, we're still an IPA country, but we're also getting to be a very fruited sour country. So
I've got a couple of ideas to play around with the cocktail on that. And I'll let you know how that goes. So
Got it.
But Drew, let's pour this this brandy and talk a little bit more with Fred, and talk to us about Dancing Goat.
Sure. So I think a lot of people, and maybe Kevin, you experienced this a little bit when you came out. You kind of look at our scope and scale, and you think, what? Huh? Did these guys sell some sort of .com company? Is there some? Is there a backstory that I don't know? Why is this almost a 40,000 square foot production facility, and why are there 4 stills operationally, and why were these guys the first one to put a rick house in the state of Wisconsin? And if you hear that our backstory is 3 generations in distillation, and you think about Dwayne, the grandfather, being alive when we broke ground, and Dwayne having built 8 distilleries around the world, and having been the GM at Barton down in Bardstown for decades, and then being a consultant and helping the Benedictine monks at Chartreuse fix their still, and helping the Black Bull guys work on their problems in Scotland. I mean, Dwayne kind of started it all, and then Dwayne helped to build a bottling plant over in Pewaukee, which helped to bottle a lot of these products. Tom, their son, became the national sales director over at Beam. Dwayne had also been working very closely in the industry with some of the products that we're all thankful for today. And there's probably one truism in the world today as we talk about bourbon and we talk about brown spirits. It's that we have one company to thank for, and it's Jim Beam. Okay, and you know, they're the ones with small batch that resurrected bourbon in this country, and by extension, in some small way, also helped to resurrect rye and American whiskeys. So Tom, as the national sales director, helped to explode that into the market. And then there's Tom's son, Dwayne's grandson Nick, is now one of our 2 owners as well as distiller. So I always joke that the family went back into it to build a family business that could be handed down to the boys' grandkids. My next boss is 18 months old. She can't quite sign my checks, but she can drool on them. Okay, but it's that whole passion when you're impassioned by it, and you've done it, and you've exploded things onto the national market. The other thing that I like to tell people is that there's a thread, a very, very significant thread in the rope that is Dancing Goat, that is Dave Pickerel. So Dave was trained by Dwayne back in the day. And then Dave went on to do all the Dave things, from Maker's Mark to Blackened and all the things that we know Dave for. But in the end, Dave helped to train Nick. And then Dave's last public appearance was at Dancing Goat when Metallica played the Kohl Center and we launched Blackened in the state of Wisconsin. So there's a whole lot of Dave Pickerel and that blood and soul of guys like Dave that kind of bleed through the pores of all of us in the building itself. And it's just that notion of, you know, let's all kind of be better and let's make something that Wisconsin's super proud of. You know, Kentucky, I mean, it is so, we talk a fair amount. I mean, it's, if you go to Texas, you really know what it means to be local in Texas, because they all bleed. Everything bleeds Texas. I think in Kentucky, it's very similar. Everybody bleeds their stuff. We don't quite have that yet. Okay, we got a lot of disparate things that are going on in a lot of states in the country. And if we can help get Wisconsin to that place where we're all pulling on the same end of the rope for the benefit of all of us in production in Wisconsin, then we're all better. And by that, I mean all craft beverage producers, from kombucha guys to craft soda, to beer, to wine, to cider, to mead, to whiskey. Right. So that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to that ethos where people from Wisconsin are out and they're traveling and they're like, this is us. These are our guys. We always pack a bottle of J. Henry. We always pack a bottle of that Death Door gin. Whenever we visit our friends out and fill in the blank, we always take stuff from Wisconsin. That's what we're hoping to be part of.
Yep.
So it becomes a little more conceptual when you realize that this family's done this for a long time.
Yeah. Love it.
And you've referenced several times the kind of the Wisconsin spirits community, and I got to experience a little sliver of that about a month ago. And one of the things that did stand out was everybody had something nice to say about everybody else. And there are some fantastic distilleries in that state. Uh, I'm very impressed by what I've tasted from the state of Wisconsin and what I saw from the state of Wisconsin. Um, and I think you've referenced Jay Henry. They kind of led that charge. They were kind of the first through the wall, but there are a lot of others that have followed suit. What do you see as the future for both Dancing Goat and the the distillery movement in the state?
I think there's always two truisms in any industry, regardless of any manufacturing industry. I think there's two truisms. Um, People get a lot of respect if you're the first guy in, the first gal in, the 1st people to take a flyer, and if you're the first guy to make ladders or shelving, or to make high-end trucks, or to make whiskey or to make spirits. The first guy to take a flyer, the first individual. I say guy, I don't mean guy literally, but the first individual, the first group to take a flyer and be fearless. And that's Guy Rehorst over at Great Lakes in Milwaukee. He gets all the respect in the world for being fearless and being completely, and he would say probably unhinged and the dumbest idea ever to be the first guy in. But massive amounts of respect for those guys. And then I think second, it's the one thing that your state is known for. Okay, what do people know you for? And in beer in Wisconsin, it's New Glarus Brewery, unabashedly New Glarus Brewery, and it's a little beer called Spotted Cow. And I referenced it before. It's Death's Door gin when it comes to spirits, is what the world knows us for. So take those things very seriously and be very focused on making sure that you give credit where credit's due. Okay, I mean it's one thing to make widgets; it's another to make things in a 3-tiered retail system. Okay, that is hearkening back to post prohibition world where everything is regulated. So, with that said, it's looking like to me that we're on a trajectory in the state of Wisconsin that's very close to the craft beer movement. Okay. I will tell you right now, I think we're past in distillation. I think we're past it matters first that it's local. I think it matters first now that it has to be good. You'll get people to buy a bottle once, but if it's not good, it doesn't matter. And if it's good and it's local, there's the icing on the cake. And that's where I think we're starting to get to in the state of Wisconsin, is that we are making some really good product. And some people have dialed in hard where they're just a vodka distillery in this state. And they're honing their craft such that I am going to make the best vodka that anybody can make at the scope and scale that I can afford. And then there's people that are doing a lot of things. And then there are people that are just doing brown spirits. So, I think there's a fair amount of drinkers in the state of Wisconsin. There's a little room for all of us. And at the same time, it's like, again, we're back to that notion. If you ask those brewers in the state of Wisconsin, what's different from when they started, if they're 25 plus years long in the tooth, they will tell you that the genesis of their business is different than today's new breweries that are opening up. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, you opened up because it was us against big beer. It was us as a reaction to big beer, and we think we can do something different, i.e. better. And now those guys are fighting for shelf space amongst themselves. Okay, if they're in production, they're fighting for a 6-pack spot on a shelf with their friends. And that's the difference. I think in spirits, we're going to see a little bit different local reaction. But at the same time, I think we're going to start to be able to catch people's attention locally. I mean, it's really hard in some games to fight the big boy, but it's also where do you want to expend all your energies, and do you want to become a producer of 43 different products, or do you want to really hone in on a dozen or less?
Right. And I've heard it said before, you can't out Kentucky. So, why would you try to make something that, hey, this tastes just like, Knob Creek, or this tastes just like Wild Turkey? Well, okay, great. If I wanted that, I could get Wild Turkey, or I could get Knob Creek. But I think people are starting to open up and look for what's something that's a little different.
Right.
I can it's to me the craft distilleries that really have a great line towards success are the ones that they may have a product that the traditional bourbon drinker can relate to, but then they have things that they can draw those people in and, okay, well, now try this, this, and this, because this is going to blow your mind. And
absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we're doing Limousine Rye. Was Nick's vision was to not be another American craft distiller making a rye whiskey. It's how can we think it 14 drills down and say, we want to do it differently with an outcome that we think will appeal to traditional rye drinkers, but also traditional bourbon drinkers.
Yeah.
And how can you do that without simplifying the process, simplifying the product, or dumbing it down in any way? And that's where we came up with, Limousine Rye and a Solera system and the whole different wood aging program that we use with vintage barrels. It is one of those things of how do you set yourself apart? How do you compete but not compete per se? I mean, we can't compete. Hell, we can't compete with, Luxco. We can't compete with Bardstown. Can't compete with Wilderness Trail. We're trying to compete against the folks here in our backyard first, okay? Because it is a competition, and it's not a competition with a zero-sum game of winning. It's a competition of growth.
Right.
So therein lies the difference. I think sometimes we hear the word competition and we think that you have to win because it's a competition. Okay, winning might be selling 100 more cases than you did last year.
Right. Rising tide lifts all ships. Right.
It does so much better. If I walk into, and this is starting to happen in Madison, it's one of the most exciting things, is you walk into a restaurant or you walk into a high-end bar and you start to see on that cocktail menu, you start to see all your local friends, because then our rye's on there. Somebody else's vodka is on there. Our gin's on there. Somebody else's bourbon is on there. Suddenly we're not highlighting other people because our products are great here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I love it.
So before I do want to touch on the stuff we were talking about on Limousine Rye, but let's talk about this brandy first.
Oh man, Go ahead, Kevin.
No, go Drew.
So I get such a nice balance between kind of the stone fruit and honey thing, kind of the peaches, nectarine kind of thing jumps out, and then the back end it fills with this very nice, natural, viscous sweetness. If I'm doing a pairing, what I want on this is like brie and salami and honey, or like a peaches and ricotta type, dessert dish. And I would finish a dinner with this.
But think about what
really
you just
beautiful.
Said. What you just described were various components in different silos that already exist in what our house drink is in the state of Wisconsin. Okay, as a brandy old fashioned. Look at all the stone fruits that you talked about. Look at all the citrus that you talked about. I think first and foremost, Wisconsin buys brandy at a price point. Okay. And we have been very lucky to have sold a lot of Corbel in this state.
Right.
And that's not to denigrate anybody else, but the bottom line is, what if we kept that money in the state of Wisconsin? What if we kept that by a producer that was doing something here? And then that producer might be us, it might be somebody else. But the bottom line is, let's be a little more thoughtful maybe about our spend.
Sure.
And instead of buying a 1-year-old brandy, let's look at a brandy like you guys are drinking that's just under 4 years old. That's proof, that 86 proof that punches through and is very vinous. Yeah. I love the grape-like quality that punches through in that. It's certainly something that you could sip neat. Certainly something you could throw a bottle in the freezer and drink cold. You could throw it over ice. But what we really love is that at that proof point, it punches through, and you can, because in its worst iteration, and I will say this, and I will try like hell to defend this next statement. The brandy old fashioned in the state of Wisconsin could be described as a big old glass of diabetes. So, I mean, it's
often overly sweet. Sure.
That's buried on top of sugar.
Yeah.
And then you backfill with more sugar. Yeah. How do you balance that? You can make a brandy old fashioned with that brandy and bittering components and fruit and backfill with club soda, and it is plenty sweet. And it's one of those things where a lot of times the thing that I hear most when I push that glass across with a brandy old fashioned to somebody, they're like, I can taste the brandy. I can,
Yes.
yes, because in the right ratios and at the right proof point, it'll punch through. And it's not just this big glass of orange, big glass of cherry juice, all the other stuff.
Yeah.
I tell people, the funny thing is that you tell people from Wisconsin, that you make your wise ass crack about it being a big glass of diabetes. And they'll say, yeah, but I use squirt. I use sour. I drink mine sour. I'm like, I'm not talking about flavors. I'm talking about calories. Look at the high fructose corn syrup in your can of squirt. It's still 200 more calories you just dropped in there by backfilling it with sour. So, and it's not to denigrate or beat people over the head and to say, we're better. It's to show them that it can be different. And by extension, you might like it.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll like it better.
Yeah. I had not had a brandied old fashioned until I was in Wisconsin on that trip. And
you had it when we went afterwards.
And I'm hooked. Okay. Yeah. So I've made a few since I've been home. Big glass of diabetes. Okay. But
they're a fun drink. I mean, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, they're still, I will say this, and thank God for the new 20 and 30-year-old drinkers of the world. They're doing two things. They're experimenting in classic cocktails, and in Wisconsin, a classic cocktail would be a brandy old fashioned. You're seeing those people in great quantities start to order whiskey old fashions, rye old fashions, bourbon old fashions, but you're also seeing them propping up the brandy old fashioned at the same time because they drink a lot like their granddaddies drank. So if I do this right, as the Korbel drinker, the white middle-aged older Korbel male starts to die off, what's propping up those Korbel numbers are those new drinkers because they're really very interested in classic cocktails and that whole cocktail scene.
Right.
So that's kind of fun to kind of listen. I mean, I talk about it all the time with my daughter who's 28 who can't tell me the last time she drank vodka. She drinks like an old man, okay, sitting in the back of a pickup truck. So it's refreshing to hear. And then this is also a group of new drinkers that is very much focused on not my generation's drinking. They're very focused on eat less, drink better. I mean, eat less, eat better, drink less, drink better. Okay. And it's more about going out and the experiences you have, learning something going out than it is about just going out and getting drunk.
Right.
And that to me is this great new part of this new drinking culture is that they're really honing in on flavors and tastes and in many cases local.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't want to cut you off on any point in that, but just to kind of speak into that point, when I go out, what I want to do in a certain regards is I want to talk to the beverage director. I'd like to talk to the chef. I want to hear about the farms that they're sourcing ingredients and things like that from. And I know you mentioned cocktails specifically for this brandy, but it almost could take the place of a port or an Armagnac, for an end of dinner drink. And yes, of course it has its, role behind the bar and in the cocktail world too, but it is so delicate and refined that I feel like it has its own place as well. And I think there's a lot of folks that are pursuing those kind of more refined things, like you mentioned with your daughter, that would be very attracted to this as well.
Oh, I agree. And at the same time, it is very, very encouraging that you say that because we are very, very focused on that being something at all times in the meal, all times in the night, all times in the weekend. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Where you're looking and going, let's screw around and do a brandy old fashioned. Okay, let's screw around and do a brandy bloody. Let's do a brandy and tonic. What is that? And what's the worst thing that happens? You just wasted 2 ounces of a $20 bottle of brandy. That is not going to, ruin the evening. Right. Bottom line is, I think the pandemic showed us, I don't know that it overshowed us, but I think it got a little more, it got more and more people a little more comfortable slinging at home and being a little more risk-taking. And they're a little more confident in their game. And if we can provide something that serves either a digestif at the end of the night, like you're talking about, Drew, or kind of an aperitif in the beginning, like maybe you would drink in Europe, or something that, is absolutely a Wisconsin go-to because I'm going to have 4 of these damn things during the Packer loss. Okay. So, I think there's a time and place, but at the same time, I mean, we're starting to understand. I think you start to see, particularly in places like Madison, Milwaukee, and maybe some of the Fox Valley, Eau Claire, La Crosse, you're starting to see people go, I understand what grappa is, and I might understand why you drink Italian grappas, and you drink something that's grape, and you just have a very small component, a small portion. Or I understand why people drink port wine, or I understand that it doesn't have to be yet another beer after my 4th beer during the meal to finish with. And, there's a lot of other ways to cut that, and that brandy serves. I will say this: We showed that brandy before we even bottled it. We showed that brandy to 3, maybe 4 very influential single barrel picking groups. And we just use it as an amuse-bouche, a palate cleanser. And they all said, damn it, I want a barrel of this. How do we get a barrel of this? I want this to be my single barrel pick.
Yep.
Nope, we're not even sure what we're doing with it yet. It was before we had even bottled it. So the feedback that we were getting on it, just as it was turning 3 to 4, was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's great.
Yeah. And what kind of barrel are you aging it in?
It's vintage barrels, vintage cooperage again. Yep.
Okay.
So and you know we're very focused on we're trying like heck not to really do shots across the bow, but we're trying to lean in on messaging that makes a lot of sense for us, where it's like, hey, let's keep our money in the state. Let's figure out a way to support ourselves. How can we support Wisconsin? That's kind of the message we're trying to send.
Absolutely.
Versus, hey, we're this for this, and we're this much less than this, or we're this much more than this, but it's okay. Or why would you want to drink that when you can drink this? It's more of a direct message of, let's not send our money across the state line. Let's keep it here.
Right.
Sure.
Okay. Well, Drew, let's pour this. I've got one of my own photos of the limousine ride.
Oh, that's nice.
So let's take a pour of that, and
I gotta get a little more water.
Okay. Yeah, keep hydrated now.
No, just to clean out the glass. I don't want to do brandy and rye back to back.
Kevin, is that the bottle that you had that's 93 proof?
It is, yes.
Is that FJ1?
It is. It looks like it's 15J2 batch.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
It's a couple bottlings in on the 6 year.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of wrap up side A, and we're going to kind of do a little blend of the show here, because we're going to switch over. We're going to talk with Fred about some music, and then we're going to come back to the limousine ride, because there's some great stuff going on there, and that'll help us dig a little bit more into the DNA of Dancing Goat. But before we do that, we want to tell you about our friends over at Stave and Bean. Hey, holidays are coming up. If you've got a coffee drinker in your life that you don't know what to get for as a gift, Stave and Bean coffee might be the thing you're looking for. Our friends Corey Welch and John Wadle, they started this company a little over a year ago, and they are barrel aging coffee beans, and they go to great lengths to make sure that they're getting quality beans, and they're aging these in a variety of different brands barrels. John happens to be the single barrel manager at Peerless here in Louisville, so they do have some that they've aged in Peerless barrels, but they've got a lot of other options there as well. They've got some that are actually cocktail based beans that this is a bit of an old fashioned or this is a bit of a Sazerac. They've really taken their time. They've refined this to an art, and it's been very well received. So if you're in the Louisville, Kentucky area, you can find this for sale at many of the Kroger stores, as well as at the Peerless gift shop. If you're not in this area, check out staveandbean.com and you can order it there. I've given this as gifts to many coffee drinkers, and they all come back with very high marks for Stave and Bean coffee. So with that being said, Fred, let's talk some music.
Sure, absolutely.
And we'll kind of start at a base level and then kind of dig into a little bit more, because I think you're going to have a bit of a different take than what we normally get on the show. But we're going to kind of set that level. And there are a couple questions we ask every guest that we have. And one of those is, what was your first concert?
First, a concert that I didn't play in, that I went to?
First concert that you went to, yes.
Los Lobos.
Oh, that's
Los
cool.
Lobos at Los Lobos at Summerfest, and it is also the band that I've probably seen the most of, unless it was Joe Jackson.
Oh, geez,
So
man.
those two
Wow.
would have been the first ones, and we're blessed in the Milwaukee area to have a little event that used to run 10 days. I think it runs 3 weekends now and no weeks in between, called Summerfest. And there is an any given day at Summerfest 60 to 80 bands. And I saw Los Lobos on a side stage. And, listening to somebody play the Bajo Sexto and conjunto music, based on where I grew up in Chicago, that spoke to me in ways that other traditional music did not speak to me.
Wow. That is very cool.
That's great.
Cool. Do you recall your first album this year ever, Bob?
Boston's first album.
Shut up.
And I will tell you this. I
Holy shit.
bartended backstage and VIP for their concert 2 years ago in Madison.
Yeah.
And they, along with Cheap Trick, sound almost like they did day one.
Wow.
Their musicality in Boston and their vocals were spot on. They were great guys. They were wonderful musicians. It was a hilarious concert to play because it was backed up with the Doobie Brothers.
Yeah.
I've probably seen the Doobie Brothers 3 or 4 times as well. But the concert split in half. Let's just throw out numbers. There were 3,000 people that bought tickets to this outdoor event. 1,500 of them were Doobie Brothers fans. 1,500 were Boston fans, and neither stayed for the other one's show.
I love it.
It was the weirdest thing ever. So Boston, absolutely Boston. And then probably after that, it was probably Tom Petty's "Damn the Torpedoes" is my guess.
Yes.
Great record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, great record.
I remember as a kid
top 10.
going to the record store and buying that album. Yes, and that's one when I talk about the record buying experience or the experience that you have in enjoying and music becoming a part of your life. It's changed so much because you don't have that experience of going into a record store, seeing a band that and you may have heard one song off that album, and you're laying down at that point, I think it was $8.98 for that album, and then going home and peeling off the cellophane and putting that on there and hearing that little frying bacon sound for 2 or 3 seconds until the first song kicks in. And that's the album that personifies that experience for me.
Well, and to me, I remember exactly what that store manager, I'm guessing store manager, maybe the store owner in little downtown Port Washington said to me when I bought Damn the Torpedoes that day. He said, "You're the 3rd person to buy this album this week." And I said, well, that's either makes me just a follower or really good at discerning great music. I don't know. Right. It's one of the two. Because I might have been a sophomore in high school at that point. Yeah. Maybe. So about that era. Oh, God. And it was one of those, I mean, and they always say things go in threes, and there's been some absolutely stellar musicians who are iconic that we have lost in the last couple of years that are just make me so sad.
Yep, absolutely. But, my wife got me tickets to see Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers the year that he passed. It was maybe, I don't know, 6 months before he passed, and that's something that I'll always treasure.
Oh, absolutely.
That last tour, yeah,
absolutely. There's a couple stories that are just flying through my mind right now. Talk about concerts. I lived in Las Vegas for a fair amount of time, and I looked at my wife, and because it's Vegas, there's no such thing as a regular concert schedule. Okay, right. I mean, people come and they come for a week or whatever. Anyways, James Brown was coming. I think I was all of 23 years old. She was 24 years old. And I said, hey, it's a Tuesday night. We're 2 school teachers. Let's get our ass down to Bob Stupak's Vegas World and see some James Brown. She goes, I am not going to see James Brown on a damn school night. No, you can go and just tell me how it was. So I get done coaching football. I fly down there. Lights are already out. Okay. It hasn't started yet. I see the typical, that Vegas palm move where it's like, if you want to be close, you got to grease this thing that's behind my back now. Mm-hmm. So I got seated in the darkness at a table with a bunch of people I didn't know, which was awesome, just off the stage. Yep. And it's a typical James Brown thing. Okay. And so 45 minutes come up, and James has got the bathrobe on, and he's got the coat on, and he's sweating profusely, and the lights come up, and got to get James off the stage. and everybody's standing up and the lights are finally on and everybody's clapping. And I realized, because I must have looked around at the other 11 people on my 12 top, that I was the only white guy. And this little grandma who's next to me, this African-American black grandma, puts her arm around me, and she's maybe 5.5 feet tall. And she doesn't even make eye contact. And she looks at me because she had seen it in my eyes, which was really embarrassing to even say this out loud. She looks at me and she stares straight ahead and she goes, "Don't worry, honey. Tonight we're all black." I'm like, I was blessed. I was blessed into a James Brown concert. And then I looked at my wife and I thought, I better pay attention to this one, because she owns 2 albums. And she owns Deep Purple's Machine Head, and she owns Melissa fucking Manchester. And I'm like, what the hell? There's either something going on really right here or something dramatically wrong. But I got to find out the answer. So it was good. I mean, it's just great being raised by somebody. My wife was raised very similar to me, being raised by people that took you to shows and took you to music and encouraged you to play music and to play instruments and to sing and to be on stage. So I mean, those were where we come from, where you feel like you see yourself a little bit when you watch a show because you've been on that stage in front of other people playing an instrument or singing.
Yeah. Now you've hinted at it, but tell us a little bit about your musical background as a musician yourself. When did you start? How did you start? What made you love it? All those things.
I think unequivocally, and I was in a lot of musical theater later in high school, and I still do a lot of musical theater. I mean, I still do side hustles. I still do all the hair and makeup for the kids at the high school that I taught at for all the shows. I've done wigs for the Madison Opera. I've done wigs for traveling Broadway shows and facial hair. That's a really weird statement. Facial hair for traveling shows that have come through town. But my first instrument was, and I might say mistakenly, cello. Okay. I'm a cellist of 8 years running, 6 years running, but not a good one. Okay. Not a good one. I was impassioned by the instrument. I liked it a lot. It was easier to stick out there than picking up a saxophone, because everybody loves the saxophone player. Everybody loves the kid that plays trumpet, especially if you're a dude. Okay. The only thing that a stringed instrument, and I used to say this in high school, the only thing that a stringed instrument is good for is guaranteeing that nobody gets laid. Okay. I mean, if you just give kids a stringed instrument and make all the boys walk around, the girls walk around, there's be no teen pregnancy anyway. So just this whole notion of just being, hey, it's a cool instrument. It's ridiculously gothic and classical and been around forever. But at the same time, I was brought up going to, listening to classical music in some respects. My wife was brought up going to the symphony. I was brought up playing cello, and probably would have been way cooler if I played upright bass. But, put that thing between my legs and played on because the girl next to me was really cute. So
isn't that the reason we all get into an instrument at some point?
It's also the reason that I took 4 years of Spanish 1 in high school. Different versions of the same girl. So it's just, but at the same time, it's like, oh my God, I fell back in love when I did that side hustle with the Madison Opera, because it's people will tell you, oh my God, I hate opera music. I'm not talking about opera music. I'm talking about how you train your voice as a woman. In this case, the one that just stopped me in my tracks. One of the women I'm working with, helping her with her look. She's 5'2", all of 120 pounds. She is carrying an auditorium of 6,000 seats with just her voice, unmiked, hitting the back wall.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's just the vocal training that opera singers get that is so, I mean, the closest we get in the rock world is Freddie Mercury. The closest we get to that is Freddie Mercury. And that operatic, you can maybe argue some level of Styx and rock opera might be somewhat close, but not the voice.
Right.
So, I mean, just this notion of how do you train your voice like an instrument?
Right.
And it's funny, it's fascinating to watch opera singers warm up because they basically whisper. Okay. They're not throwing until they have to be on stage. It's not the way a rock band, starts out and warms up. I mean, it's just fascinating to me to watch the body as instrument, to watch people play brass instruments, strings instruments. But then I ended up being in choir for the last little bit of high school, and ended up being on stage and having some singing roles, which was pretty cool. I mean, it's amazing what that can do for your level of confidence as an adult. Playing an instrument, singing in front of people, playing a sport. I mean, they're all they're all confidence builders for sure.
Sure. No, definitely.
But yeah, I mean,
I
I
love
don't own a cello. I have not picked up a cello since I stopped playing. I've listened to a lot of cello music. I've gone to a fair amount of concerts, but I have not played again. It has been 40 years since I strapped a big piece of wood between my legs. So, which might be a quote in and of itself.
I was gonna say that. Yeah, that's a
I
caption or something.
think we've got the money clip
It's
for
a
the show
t-shirt.
now.
It's a t-shirt.
So from the who are the rock stars of the cello world then?
I think right now the guys that I'm really excited and would pay to see the next time they come through Madison, I think they're called Black Cello. It's two black musicians playing cello. Those guys are phenomenal. I'd go to see Yo-Yo Ma for all the traditional reasons that people think of as cello. Back as a kid, and then again watching video clips of the Traveling Wilburys this weekend with my daughter's boyfriend, who's a very old soul. I had forgotten how much Jeff Lynne and the Electric Light Orchestra, that I loved the electrification of stringed instruments, and I love those people that can take a cello and play it standing up, and not just in a seated, staid fashion. So that to me is, that's what I like, is that, and I don't like the hybridization necessarily. I like the new invention of doing something differently, which I think still harkens back in many cases to what the cello used to be. And at the same time, I mean, some of those urban violinists, okay, those two gals that are playing violin that are urban from Detroit, who are just killing it. I mean, there's a lot to be said about the crossover in music. I mean, I think a lot of those people can show us different things about different instruments, and by extension, we can learn a little bit about ourselves at the same time.
No, I absolutely agree. I was curious your thoughts on, there's artists like Pentatonics that have incorporated a cello, or the Gunger Band, or Lindsey Sterling is on a tour right now with, I think she plays like a viola. It's not, a violin or a cello, but it's this dancing incorporation. How do you feel as somebody who has that background to see those things kind of pop-ified or modernized and kind of,
Zero issues. And isn't Pentatonics, aren't those two guys that got famous on that YouTube clip where the video was them in very traditional old world 1800s garb, and they're playing in front of a very staid audience, and then pretty soon they're just cutting up and they're tearing strings and they're tearing their bow hairs and everything, right?
Yes, it's very similar. Yeah.
And I love to go to shows like that. Right now, I have less interest in going to arena shows or auditorium shows, and we go to more shows right now, house concerts, back to the way we used to watch music as 16 and 18-year-olds. And a lot of those people will bring those instruments back in to the game. I mean, there's a place in Madison called Kiki's House of Righteous Music. Kiki's House of Righteous Music is a 1,200 square foot ranch house on the east side of Madison with a woman who is completely impassioned by singer-songwriter rock and folk. And a lot of those guys will bring in cellos. A lot of those guys will sometimes bring in violins that they might not have had in their touring shows. And they get to play themselves. And they'll tell us why as we sit there. I brought this back in because I think this lends something in a more intimate setting than it does in a large setting, because this instrument gets lost when we rock out. So I would go to see all those groups that you pointed out. And I don't have any problem hybridizing. I got into this stupid concert about Elton John's new thing with Dua Lipa, okay, where he's got all the, what's that, the voice recorder thing where it makes everybody sound
auto-tune stuff. Yeah.
So he's auto-tuned obviously in that, but it's like, I don't care. Do you like the music? Is it good? Did you have fun listening to it? That to me is where the rubber hits the road. Again, now we're back to whiskey. Nobody should tell you how to drink. Nobody should tell you what's good. People should tell you, hey, I like this. Try it. If you like it, great. Boom.
Okay. Kiki's. Tell me the name of that, because I'm going there next. House of Righteous Music. Okay. Next time I'm in Wisconsin, we're going to go there. Okay.
Absolutely. Think about this. Kiki books bands that are typically between a Chicago and a Milwaukee show, a Chicago and a Minneapolis show. And you typically will end up there on maybe a Thursday night or a Sunday night. and the door can be anywhere from $15 to $25. The musicians get the entire door. She'll cook them dinner, and if she knows you well enough and you've been good enough times in the basement, that you could probably sleep on the couch as well. So it's all money in your
I
pocket,
love that.
and everybody, it's BYOB. She puts coolers of ice downstairs, and everybody just sits and have a couple beers or a glass of wine, and in my case, a flask or two, and then it's just listening to great music, and it's music that she likes, and it's curated so well that it's kind of like, it's akin to that liquor store that you trust their palate when they pick single barrels.
Yep.
Mhm.
I trust Kiki's ear. That I almost never do I go back and look at the clips of a musician if I don't know who it is. If the date works, we go.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's
But that's the way we listen to music in college.
Yeah.
You had buddies that were in some dumbass band and we all sat in the basement, and it was the same. It was kind of that same thing. I mean, right now, so the people that would typically play, the biggest people that'll typically play Kiki's is she'll get Robbie Folks. Okay, Robbie Folks will come through. She'll get well, Justin Townes Earl would have played there had things not happened. By the way, possibly the best concert, maybe the best concert I've ever seen, was at Justin's show. And then whatever that baseball project is, okay, that has a couple of pretty high-end musicians that played around the state, around the country for the last 3 years, that are all impassioned by minor league baseball. Kiki gets guys that came off 1,500 seat shows to play for 40 people in her basement.
Yeah,
so
that's very cool.
So it's really cool.
I love it.
Justin Townes Earl, my best comment from the stage to an audience member. Well, Joe Jackson, I might have been 30 when I saw this. Joe Jackson, he's playing at the Orpheum in downtown Madison. He does this. He's maybe 8 bars into maybe the second song in the set. And he does this to the lighting guy. And he points and he goes, "You stop singing. You're fucking the whole thing up." Because he could hear this guy, and he was so out of tune that it was messing up the whole show.
That's hilarious.
But Justin was hilarious because it was a show at the Palomino in St. Paul, and it was a standing show because it was a very small show. It was just Justin, so it was an acoustic set, no band, and he had just come out of rehab, and there was somebody behind me that very clearly looked like he was once, twice, thrice divorced with a woman on his shoulder that was 20 plus years younger, and he was very clearly going to impress her, is what my take on the whole situation was. So we start screaming song titles at the stage. And finally, after about the third time this happened, Justin turns around and goes, "I'm not a motherfucking jukebox. Shut up." And I thought the best put down ever. The guy made it through another song and a half before he slunk out the back door. And it's just like, I mean, okay, if that doesn't tell you a lot or show you a lot about how tough it is to be on stage and how tough it is in many cases, why make it tougher?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've had some great concert experiences. I mean, I've been in a lot of really great concerts where I've, been blessed to be with some really, really good musicians in high school and college. So it was really fun it's always fun to see somebody else and how they can command the stage.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys ever do music at the distillery?
We did, and it was not probably what this person was envisioning. It was a cellist from the School of Music from the UW that wanted to do a cello concert. And of course, the one guy in the freaking distillery, and maybe the one guy in any distillery in the country that's ever played cello, okay, any craft distillery for sure, is not even there and available to go because I was on the road doing something else. And I knew what he was going for. Imagine a stringed quartet. Imagine a solo upright bass or a cello or a couple of violins in the middle of a rickhouse with all the sound just bouncing everywhere off all those hot surfaces.
Right.
And that's what he was going for. But because we're not licensed to have non-distillery folks and or industry people in the rickhouse, he played on the loading dock. But at the same time, that's what we're trying to do at the Goat. He played for about 50, 55 people, and he played for an hour. And he played a lot of his own music and his own compositions. But Nick talked about whiskey and poured whiskey with 50 people in soccer mom chairs. And this guy played cello, and it was all free. And it was a great Thursday in summer.
Yeah.
And Fred wasn't there.
Okay. So you mentioned this rick house, and there she blows.
She's a beauty.
She is a beauty. So I got to hear your story about this. So go ahead and, if you don't mind, share with Drew and our audience how this came to be at Dancing Goat.
What came to be, I think the genesis of it was we're very focused on providing educational experiences for people. And I mean, a lot of us have been blessed to be able to travel down to where you're at, Kevin, to be able to travel down and see the trail and to see Kentucky and to see some Tennessee distilleries and to see what the what the lifeblood of American whiskey is and where, what kind of its origin space. And you can extrapolate that to Pennsylvania, Ohio, et cetera, et cetera. But we wanted to build Little Kentucky in Little Cambridge for everybody, people that could afford to go down there, people that could never afford to go down there, for people to experience what American distillation can do. Because that's, for Wisconsin and for anywhere that those rickhouses are, that's the last part of terroir. That's your climate, finishing that barrel and aging that whiskey commensurate with what you're bringing to the table as far as where you are longitudinally and latitudinally. So that was us trying to, replicate and show people, now that we've got open fermentation and we've got 4 stills running and we've got a Vendome, copper, and we got the whole still going. It's very akin to what you're going to see in Kentucky. And that's us trying to put a little spin on Wisconsin. Oh, look at me there.
Look at you. Look at you. And that's the newest still, is that correct?
That's the 18-inch column Vendome. Yep. So that's us just trying to, to say to people, hey, you can easily go to Kentucky for sure. If that's something that's in your wheelhouse and you can financially swing that, many of us are blessed to be able to do that, but many more do not have the means to travel and to do that. So,
but you do some things differently as well.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is with this limousine rye that we're talking about. So Drew, you've been sipping on this for a little bit. What do you think?
Yeah. So I get a tremendous amount of sort of the extra barrel notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you get the marshmallow, sort of the toasted graham, almost the I'm trying to think of the exact correct way to say this, because it's carbonized, but not in the way that you think of carbonized in a negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just when you caramelize a fruit or you caramelize a piece of chocolate or something like that. So you get a lot of that toasted note on it. It's really delicious, and I love that the way that the rye spice holds up to the caramelized sugars in this really symbiotic way. So that's kind of my cursory thoughts on it, but
yeah.
No, I think again, back to that comment that I made earlier, where we're trying to do something different, okay, and not doing what a lot of people are doing, which is making a rye and doing as best you can. We're just trying to change the story a little bit, okay, and at the same time, how do you get the vast majority of brown spirits drinker who are bourbon drinkers? How do you get those people into that rye whiskey? Okay, without simplifying it or without dumbing it down. So we go into vintage once used bourbon and Tennessee whiskey barrels. So once used, and those can be used, we love some barrels if we can get an American craft distiller to send us some 2-year-old barrels, because they're so hot currently that they have to, and I will not give any names, but so hot currently that they're bottling their stuff at 2 years of age, because there's still so much life left in those barrels. But it takes away some of that green tannic note, okay, that punches through. We're not a straight rye. That is not a straight rye. We will make straight ryes, we will make straight bourbons, but that is not one of them. Okay, it is a notion of trying to do things differently, and at the same time trying to cross over and bring bourbon folks in. So it goes into once used vintage barrels, okay, from the rest of the industry, and then at the same time we float staves, French limousine oak staves in those, and then we go into a limousine rye or Limousin rye. French old cognac barrels, that Solaris system right there. So man, that looks so good on that picture, doesn't it? So yeah, and that is that notion of balancing and balancing and balancing and rounding and rounding and rounding and continuing to look at how you can. And a lot of people are, not a lot, but the one thing I hear constantly as I travel the state and the country is, God, that is not the slap in the face rye that I really like. And I'm like, good. Then it's you are understanding our product. You are very clearly understanding our product. There are those, they tend to be younger in age and they tend to be very spice, black pepper forward. We're just trying to be a very balanced rye for people that that want to experiment a little bit and want to play and want to see what else the rye world can do for them.
Yeah.
Because it's the oldest cocktailing whiskey in America.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The back of this bottle, and I love this sentence. Many sourced rye share the same mash bill as limousine rye, but that's where the similarities cease.
Yep.
Okay. You're not trying to tell anybody that this is anything other than what
it is.
The base whiskey is.
Mhm.
Okay. So you're not trying to spin some yarn and hide what this started as.
Yeah.
But what it started as is not what it finishes as.
Not at all what it finishes as. And we're very, very focused on open and honest communication, open and honest and true stories, and the ability for people to find an answer if they question what we're doing. So, for example, we make it very clear that is a lot of MGP sourced rye. And that's where that sentence comes from on the back of that label, is that you've seen this in a lot of bottles.
Right.
When 95% of the rye in this country comes from one guy, you've seen this before.
Right.
But that's where it stops. And that's where we get to start to tell our story and how we influenced that and how we changed it a little bit.
How has the use of barrels that you've utilized in this process affected the approach that you're taking to your own distillate and how it's aged in barrels?
I think it's going to confirm that we absolutely want to do very traditional things as well. So we want to make a straight rye. We want to see if we can come up with something that mimics what everybody else is doing. But we didn't want to do that first. We want to do a 32% rye bourbon. We want to do a 20.1% rye bourbon. Okay, we want to do high rye bourbons. We want to do wheat whiskeys. It's that whole notion of what are some of the categories that everybody is already in and interested in and understands, and what are some of the undefined ones. I think you could maybe write an entire master's paper on if there's one undefined, really uncaptured, maybe is a better word, category in American spirits, it's single malt whiskey. And I would have thought at this point, Westland would have defined that for everybody because they are quintessentially great single malt whiskey, but nobody knows what the hell that means.
Right.
So if you think about potential in the industry, how about the first group that ever figures out single malt whiskey, whether they're from Virginia or Alabama or Texas? I mean, that's the one that nobody understands. And if somebody defines it and says, this is what it should taste like.
Right. And you're getting that to some degree now because we've got guidelines that are there.
Right.
But you have people that have gone before those guidelines, like Westland, like Deerhammer in Colorado, like Balcones, like Virginia Distilling Company, that are all about that American single malt movement. So yeah, that's the stuff that's exciting about craft whiskey, and that's what you can probably look for big whiskey to try to rip off once it starts to gain some popularity.
I think, and then to further answer your question, it's just the joy that we have in the back with all the guys in production who are just throwing stuff out and having these great conversations about, hold on, what if we tried this? I mean, there was a run where for a month or 2 months, we just did nothing but screw with yeast. Okay. And it was the same mash bill and it was all different yeasts.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we don't know what that's going to look like until 5, 6, 8 years down the road. We don't know what the nuances are for a while. Okay. And then looking at all the farmers that we're partnered with in the state of Wisconsin and what they can bring to the table and how we can highlight them. I will tell you this. I mean, that brandy, we tried, Nick tried really hard to find Wisconsin grapes to make that brandy. And it's a classic example of, okay, do you make the best local thing or do you make the best that you can in the category? And that was what it came down to. It's like, sure, we can make a really good brandy out of Wisconsin grapes. That might not be the best brandy. And that's not to denigrate anybody that's making that. It just didn't hit the profile that we were doing. or
Right.
trying to hit. It was, how do you make the best brandy?
Right.
And how do you find the best grapes?
Yeah.
So, and I think the same thing comes for, when we're screwing around with kind of these subcategories of corn whiskey and wheat whiskey. We were for this group that came out on a 50-person tour bus on Saturday. We let them thief out of an 8-year barrel of wheat whiskey from MGP. And it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I mean, and to my palate, it's like this in a bottle now, this now bottle.
Right.
I couldn't even put enough words in the sentence to stop stammering. And it was like, okay, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find the best things, and we're trying to make the best things.
Mm-hmm.
So when will we start to see your whiskey that you've distilled yourselves in the marketplace?
So right now we're putting down about 120 barrels a month. Okay, so you start to see that over time.
Yeah.
We will always be sourcing whiskey at the same time we're making whiskey. 2023 is probably going to be the year that we open up and put out our own bourbon as well as our own wheat whiskey on the market. Those will be sourced at this point in time. They will be the best sourced barrels that we can find. And then at the same time, and I think our thoughts have changed over the years. Okay, there was a whole notion of it being a thought in the very beginning of maybe we start to supplant the stocks over time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily know that we're going to do that anymore. We might continue to always do limousine the way we do limousine today.
Yep.
And then all the new things become standalones and not supplanting spirits and trying to replicate. But the bottom line is we'll always tell you the truth. We'll always tell you where it's from, and we'll always endeavor to put the best product in the bottle.
Yeah. And
the bottom line is, try to make everybody proud about what we're doing. I will tell you that my favorite story about going to Bourbon Fest in Kentucky, sitting in the back of the General Nelson at the gazebo in Bardstown, and bringing craft whiskey for years upon years upon years, and watching it sit at the table, and knowing that it's good craft whiskey, knowing that it's good craft bourbon, and watching it sit and nobody trying it.
Mm.
And then finally, I called my friend Joe Henry Sr. at the Henrys, and I said, I'm sorry, but I need you to help me prove a point. And he's like, what? What's your point? I said, I'm going to Bardstown. I want to bring one of your bottles, and I want to put it on the table because I'm done listening to these fuckers denigrate craft spirits. And it was the one time where I said, stop. Everybody try this J. Henry bourbon. And it stopped them in their tracks. And they're like, where's this from? I said, it's from Wisconsin. Okay. And it's very clearly done this way, but it's a Wisconsin product. So let's stop saying that you guys don't think any craft is good. And it was the first time that group of a lot of chaser tossers, people that spend a lot of money on booze, bourbon, actually stopped and took notice of anything from Wisconsin. And that was before that product was even on the shelf. and Joe met me at the house late at night. And I'm like, oh, dude, you gotta do me a solid. He's like, I got your back. Take one of my bottles from the house. So that's good. It's all good.
That's a great story.
Yeah, I mean, it's that notion of, and it's kind of what I think the ethos of this 4-group this 4-group collective that you highlighted at the beginning, particularly my whiskey den for sure, is that highlighting of craft. Craft is certainly not completely there yet, but it's getting closer than it was 5 years ago, way closer than 10 years ago, and there are some really great things being done in that segment of the market. We just need to get the rest of the country to start paying attention and thinking that Blanton's is the only damn bottle you need to buy.
Oh, we could do another whole hour on Blanton's.
Oh man.
Because I'm drinking right now. I just got into a single barrel pick that we did of corn whiskey with a local retailer. Before that, I was into a malted bourbon, which these are really oddball groups of categories. But if you think about corn whiskey is a very different canvas. It's not an all white canvas, but it's certainly a tan canvas. And if you start to play with what you're aging it in, we're aging it in old aromatic bitters barrels. Cherry spice bitters barrel, cherry vanilla bark bitters barrels, chocolate bitters barrels.
Right.
It's just one flavor profile of corn called sweet. And then suddenly these great paintings can come up as you start to paint on it, as you start to age it in a secondary vessel in a different container. And it's one of those things that I think is going to hopefully start to set us apart as pseudo mad scientists in the world of being able to play around and kind of also still have those very traditional things. This is just a straight up 7-year corn whiskey that is cask strength. That's at 118. But at the same time, you put them in these crazy bitters barrels. Suddenly, it's a bottled cocktail. We put one in that cherry spiced Woodford Reserve spiced cherry bitters barrels, and it tasted like marzipan. And they sold out of it at one of the top liquor stores in the state. Sold out of it in weeks because nobody had any idea. Because it was like Drew was talking about before. It's that dessert draw at the end where you don't have to have anything more at the end of the night than just a 1 ounce nip of that.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. That's awesome. Well, Fred, if we're going to hop in the truck with you and we're going to hang out, we're going to drive out to one of these festivals or something, and we're going to be in your truck, what are we going to listen to now as far as music goes?
And this is where I get that people just think that I'm a complete raving lunatic. I've had this question. Maybe you both have been asked this question. If it comes on the radio, what's a group that you always turn off? Mine is the Beatles.
Wow!
If the Beatles comes on my radio, I turn it off immediately. Got into it with my daughter's boyfriend this weekend because we're playing cards and he puts on YouTube some Billy Joel, and I'm like, please turn that off. And then he put on Jim Croce, and I'm like, who the hell are you? You're older than me now, and it wasn't good then. And so if we're going to listen to that, what I think you're going to listen to a lot from me is right now in the CDs that are in the little old car that I'm driving, there's a couple Robbie Folks CDs in there because he's kind of a cross between like country rock singer-songwriter stuff. There's at least one Joe Jackson that's in there. There's at least, you know what I bet is still in there that probably is like at the bottom of 12 or 15 CDs is a goofy ass Meatloaf CD that my sister put in there. Bat Out of Hell is probably still sitting in my car. But at the same time, you talk about rock opera. That's kind of rock opera-ish. Trained in a church, trained in a gospel church. To me, it's less about in that case. To me, if I'm listening to that, it's less about music than it is about the vocals of that one guy. Okay, and to me, Queen first and foremost to me was about his vocals, and then it was about how good the rest of the music was. But for me, what grabbed me initially was vocals. And then in probably the back annals of the back seat, there's an entire series of old blues artists that were recorded in Port Washington and Grafton, Wisconsin. They're brought up under the cover of darkness when the Wisconsin Chair Factory in Port Washington was making old phonographs. And then these guys were recorded in basements in what was a pseudo musical underground railroad. And they were recorded in the middle of the night, and they were brought out as old archived CDs, much like the guy in Louisiana that brought in all those blues musicians. So the music that's in my car right now is guys like Blind Lemon Jefferson, that kind of group. But Junior Kimbrough is also in there. Some of that old blues Mississippi stuff. There's a lot of Zydeco in my house that I listen to. A lot of Zydeco. One of my favorite concerts is first time I took my wife to a Zydeco show here in Madison. Just some great moments like that to me. But the crazy thing is there's no classical music anywhere in my car. It's all vocals. It's all with vocals. And there's no show tunes, much as people want to peg me into that guy. So there's also no show music.
All right. Well, Fred, we've kept you here for a while now, and we've had a great time with you, and we appreciate your time and your sharing with us more about yourself and Dancing Goat and music. But tell people where they can find you and the distillery on social media, please.
We're out in Cambridge. It's Dancing Goat Distillery. We're at dancinggoat.com is our website. And then we're at Dancing Goat for both all of our social instas and everything else. You can find us on Facebook, Dancing Goat Distillery. We're probably least clearly found on Google Maps. So occasionally end up on the wrong side of Highway 12 when they drop a pin. It's like, no, get closer than that.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, we're pretty easy to find. Our social media stuff is on point. We're doing a lot of geofenced YouTube ads and whatnot for both Limo and Death Store. So
Yep.
if you're looking at the right kind of YouTube ads and we've geofenced your neighborhood, you might find where you're seeing us for 15 seconds as well.
Awesome. Drew, how about yourself?
Yep, you can find me on Instagram at drew.crawley63. That's where I'm posting the majority of the music. And then, of course, I would be honored if you would follow along on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, wherever you like to find new tunes.
Awesome.
Right. As for us, the Bourbon Turntable, you can find us on YouTube. Head on over there, subscribe to the show so you can watch it there. If you just like to listen to your content, you can find us on your favorite podcast platforms. We are also on Facebook. We have a Facebook page where we post all of our shows. We have a Facebook group where we talk about the things that we are drinking and what we're listening to. And that was kind of what brought about that photograph there.
Awesome.
I don't offhand remember exactly what I was listening to that night, but I do remember I was enjoying that limousine rye. So
Perfect.
Hey, on behalf of Drew and Fred, thank you everybody for listening tonight. And until next time, cheers, love,
Thanks, guys.
and Freebird.
Cheers.
Good night.